All right, so I'm Geoff Zoeckler, and I've got a couple of different things worth sharing from my background. So one of them that's most relevant to the setting today is that I'm currently a master's student at Buffalo in New York on creativity and change leadership. So a program that's been around for a while, similar objectives to the program here. I've also been spending the last 6 months working with a group called Design Impact, doing social good work, extending the tools and ideas of design thinking into the hands of students and to faculty in order to use in their society to try to create projects of social good. And then the piece that's most relevant to the topic today, I work at Seek Company, where we work to connect our clients with human beings. And it sounds like a simple thing to do. You know, we can connect as humans all the time, but it's something we're kind of out of practice with when you get into that corporate dynamic. And so we're constantly working to change that business to consumer relationship more to a human-to-human one in order to create transformational ideas from that empathic connection. And so we're going to talk a lot about empathy, and I wanted to first share a story from earlier this year. So another piece about me is I have 3 daughters, and my oldest daughter is 7, about to turn 8. And she just had her 2nd grade musical, so it's a group of people, 7, 8-year-olds up on stage for about a half an hour singing and dancing. And it looked a little something like this. So, for the most part, this looked like any typical 7, 8-year-old musical presentation. Except you may have noticed there was one boy off to the side. So this is my daughter. Her name is Lily. And there's a boy who has special needs who's part of her class. And so he has special helpers that help him through school to make it through the day. But he was up with the rest of the students in front of everybody performing as well. And if you notice, he was having a difficult time, and he was, stomping his foot. And throughout the performance, it was getting a little bit out of control. And you could sense a gap being formed between the rest of the students and this boy named Sammy. And, I couldn't help but reflect later and think about that Sammy probably goes through most of his life feeling a little bit invisible because he doesn't connect with the other students immediately, and he's not the same. And that there's this wall that gets created between him and others. And so there was a little bit of an unplanned story that played out this evening, and a sense of pride that I now carry with me related to this topic of empathy is at one of the moments where Sammy was stomping his feet, most excessively, my daughter reached out and held his hand. And a murmur went through the crowd, and it was everyone in the audience immediately connected with that simple act of empathy. And there was just this real easy simplicity to what we had seen and what happened. And you also got a sense of it was a very vulnerable thing for my daughter to do. And I'm not bragging on that, but just another reminder of how we learn from children. There's an age at which the power of cooties and of icky boys and that peer pressure is so much that this doesn't happen. But still in 2nd grade, you can see these acts of simple human connection, and they're really powerful and can completely change the course of an evening or an afternoon. And we've had parents writing to us and saying how powerful of a teaching lesson that was for their kids to be able to see that on stage. And this idea that we're all almost genetically identical, 99.9% identical. We go through similar emotional needs, and we connect with each other in similar ways is what's being talked a lot about right now in psychology, through brain science, and it's what we're going to talk about today as well. A bit about what empathy is. We're going to touch briefly on why we do it as a human society, then touch briefly on why we don't. What are the reasons why we might not all the time? Quickly cover what it requires, and then also focus a bit on what's the possible return in different areas of our lives by focusing on empathy. So this first question, I'd asked some of the folks who were sitting here just to write down a couple of key words or sketch an image. Does anyone have something they're willing to share as you thought about this topic of empathy? So what's something you wrote down? Yeah.
Positivity.
Positivity.
Imagination.
And imagination. Okay. Any other thoughts?
Communication.
What was that?
Communication.
Communication. Compassion.
Understanding.
Understanding.
Sharing.
Sharing.
Engaged.
Engaged. Yeah.
Not hearing, listening.
And not hearing, listening. Yeah, there's a lot of richness in this topic of empathy. And just to provide one definition from Zeke's perspective, it's allowing what you're taking into your head to affect your heart, compelling you to act on another's behalf. And to put into three, basic words, it's head, it's heart, and it's gut. And we're going to talk about gut a little bit more, of why that's so important. First, I want to play a little video for you.
Great, but what is it?
It's based on empathy. Do you know what the word empathy means?
No, I'll have to have the beginner's course on that one. Empathy, is it something like sympathy?
Oh, it goes beyond sympathy. Sympathy is to understand what someone feels. Empathy is to project your imagination so that you actually feel what the other person is feeling. You put yourself in the other person's place. Do I make myself clear? Why did you do that?
Empathy. I put myself in your place and I felt that you wanted to be kissed.
So in reality, it's not empathy without that action. So, a simplified way of thinking about sympathy and empathy is that sucks. And empathy is this sucks. That you take it on and you're compelled to act because of your level of investment into another person's needs. And a little bit of why we do it, there's lots of perspectives on this. There's lots of great research coming out right now, but just a few different thoughts is you can look to this idea of survival. So as a species, we may have adapted this as a way of connecting with others and forming communities in order to survive against beasts who were stronger than us and that we were threatened by. That if we worked in a pack and we worked as a community, you could survive out in the fields of Africa against the lions. Another perspective is that this is a way for us to advance our civilization and reach more towards that utopian society that we strive for by creating connections with each other in which we care about the other person's outcome as much as ours, and that advances the civilization. And also there's a lot of good neuroscience research going on right now that we're also born with it. And for what reason you're born with it is up for debate, but that we have what's called mirror neurons that mean as you go into a situation with another person, you start naturally mirroring them. And it's a way of saying, I am like you. So you show a similar body language. You might start to even take on some of their tone or mannerisms, and it's very subtle. But there's situations where I went to a conference and I was talking with a person sitting next to me, and a colleague of mine took my picture behind us because I had exactly mirrored his body language without noticing it. He had crossed his legs, put his arm up on the chair, and when I turned to talk to him, I put my arm up on the chair and crossed my legs. Didn't even know I had done it. And so that kind of thing we see often. So some of the reasons why we don't engage in this all the time, it takes a high amount of energy. So you'd be a puddle of a mess if you walked around the streets of London trying to emotionally connect with everyone you saw. It takes a lot of investment. There's also a sense of risk, too, that when you see the beggar on the street, you have a sense of fear of, what if they're lying? What if this isn't real? What if I've given my money and it isn't even for the situation that I thought it was for? There's some risk involved, and often personal sacrifice. So it's putting yourself into a vulnerable situation that might not go the way you exactly expected. What if my daughter had reached her hand out and then all the boys and girls started to laugh at her? That's inside of us, and we're constantly worried about that potential sacrifice. And something else I want to talk a little bit more about, too, is something that Zeke has coined, the game dynamic. And so this is a situation that we see a lot of times in corporations, and you can find it in other situations in life as well, where empathy gets switched off. So we're going to watch a quick video here as well. And this goes by quickly, so pay attention.
Donaldson right in on the edge of the grass, and that one's hit off the mark. Oh, goodness. Ibar is called out.
All right, so what happened? What did you notice? What was the actions you saw? What's that? Yeah, so there was no one running to assistance. Yet what happened was the pitcher threw the ball, batter hit the ball hit the pitcher in the head. The batter started running to first base, third baseman grabbed the ball, threw it to first baseman caught it, umpire called him out. Everyone who was on that field continued to perform their job function appropriately. And it wasn't until the play was over that they came to his aid. But if you were listening, what did you hear? Ooh. Yeah, we heard it even too in some murmurings of the crowd. We weren't even watching it live. The whole crowd gasped because they felt it immediately. They weren't in the game being paid to perform that function. They could witness this other human act, another human need in somewhat of an appropriate manner. And we see this happen within corporations of if you don't feel that you're being incentivized and motivated to actually care about others' emotions, why are you going to prioritize creating that connection with people? You're going to continue to perform your job as you think you're being paid to and you're being incentivized for. So often we're doing a lot of work just to try to break down those barriers and show people how empathy can connect to something greater. And it requires a personal decision. So this is not something you can just tell people to do. You have to go into it with a personal desire to connect. You have to then look for what are the emotions that that person is experiencing in this situation. And to get your brain chemistry into a similar place and mirror neurons to fire, a simple thing to do is to recall a time you felt a similar emotion. And it's a pretty simple path. We do it very quickly once we've kind of rationalized what the process is. And there's some tools that can help us that we'll spend some time training clients on how to use. But there's some work based on Robert Plutchik that would say there's only a certain set of emotions that all humans experience through life. And that by the age of 25, you have had a situation where you have experienced every one of these on the wheel. So if you encounter someone that's experiencing emotion, it might not be the same situation. Maybe your father hasn't died of cancer, but you have felt grief. Maybe you had an animal that passed away and you felt a deep grief. And so you can connect with that human being by identifying a similar space. And also where to look for that emotion is not in the words that they say. So often there's a fallacy within especially corporations of if you go into an interview with a human being, you should record every word that they're saying. We should get a transcript of that. We should put quotes around it, and then we should base our innovations off of what that consumer has said. And that's where we get what we call traditional insights. These basic, flat-line, obvious truths that come from what someone can say, when 93% of the emotional information that's being communicated from that person comes in body language and tone of voice. A couple quick examples might be why you don't, call your potential wife over the phone to ask them to marry you, or why you wouldn't fire someone over email. Because there's a level of emotion you need to communicate in those situations that you can't with just words. And so to get into this topic, too, of what's the return on empathy. So for corporations, this can be the difference between predictable innovations and truly consumer-relevant innovations. And also it can be the decider between, are you going to have a group of consumers or are you going to have a group of advocates for your brand who are working for you? So I want to show an example that comes from the medical industry related to the topic of diabetes. So after talking with some consumers, hearing what they said and analyzing the words that they used, a team of people came up with this insight, which is, I know I need to take my insulin before meals at night, but my life is hectic and night times are busy. I often forget it. And so this was interviewing moms who had diabetes and families. And so in that context, this is what she told us, that her life is hectic, and at night times, she often forgets it. So if you were faced with this insight, what might you want to do as a company trying to solve for this? What are things you might be able to create or come up with? What's that? An alarm clock, something to remind you when to take it. Yeah, and other various versions of that. Maybe it's app-based, maybe it's things that vibrate, maybe it's something that sits out on the counter that can, charm, have some sort of alarm to let you know. Problem is that when we went into a more of a 3-hour immersive discussion with this woman and made that empathic connection, when we took in all parts of the head, heart, and allowed ourselves to be compelled to act on her behalf, we came up with a different insight, which is that for her, taking her insulin is a reminder that she's broken. She doesn't mind giving it to herself in the morning when she's alone, but at night and her family is close by, it feels like a reminder to them that she's broken. So in that situation, what's the last thing you'd want to create for them? Is a constant reminder of how broken she is in front of her family. So in this situation, we were able to expose that had they gone off and taken this insight, which sounds very real, it seems, oh yeah, that's definitely true, we could solve for that. And when you dug into the situation, had you solved it in that way, you would have been increasing her emotional pain for that situation. And you would have never known why the product you had created hadn't sold well. You might have blamed a myriad of other issues when really it came down to you were solving the wrong emotional needs. You hadn't dug deep enough and you hadn't made a personal connection with them. And when you get into that space, you can start to create some really good creative deliverables as well to try to continuously inspire people within an organization to connect. So coming out of that work were created posters that were put up around the offices, reminding all of the employees of what is this really about? What are we solving for here? And then that can lead to some pretty powerful, what we might call like an adcept. So starting to get a draft idea, a prototype of a concept, and then putting it up around the building and communicating in a much more powerful way what the insight and what you might be solving for it is. So I have diabetes, diabetes does not have me. Or, this tagline of Dear Sugar, I want a life of spice. So it starts to play into the other aspects and things that we felt compelled to do on the behalf of this consumer after making that connection. And it has to do with an invisible monitoring device and application so that it isn't a constant reminder to her family of what's going on. In the social sector, you often see that an empathic connection can have huge differences in funding, and also you spend more time thinking about an individual. And to illustrate just a couple of quick points on this, there's lots of good examples of this. I go to a church called Crossroads in Cincinnati, and we just ran last week this thing that's called Beans and Rice Week. And last year, it was their first year doing it, and they had told a compelling story of we can join as a community, and we can eat like some of the third world countries. And then we can use that money for social good in our own city. We can extend the number of children that can go to preschool. We can keep pools open in our community. And so there were multiple points of empathic connection, of seeing the lifestyle we were living and thinking about the lifestyles that others lead, and how could we possibly put ourselves into a situation to experience some empathy and then also use that money towards good. And so last year, the group putting on the event spent $10,000 in man resources, putting together the graphics, the advertising, taking the time to communicate this idea to the community, and in 1 week raised $377,000. And this year, that mission has spread from one church to 40 churches around Cincinnati. And next week, I'm going to find out what the return on that creation of empathic connection had financially for our city. Very powerful thing. And another story, too, which I won't go into a lot of detail with, but there was a doctor in Jerusalem who did a study using patient photos near the CT scans for the radiologist to see the picture of the patient that they were about to review for a scan. So typically, they were just given a scan and they were told, all right, what are your findings, write your report, and what might the implications be for this patient. So he started adding their pictures. And through this study found that around 30% more words were used in the report when a picture was present than when it wasn't. There was a 46% increase in the incidental findings, so a finding that was not what the patient had come in for but happened to show up in the report, and a 325% increase in the number of recommendations for that patient. that by just having a still image of the person whose life was at stake based on this recommendation, the doctors did a better job. They wrote more, they shared more potential ideas, and they spotted things that would have otherwise gone unrecognized and undiagnosed. The last thing I want to show is back towards that consumers versus brand advocates. I want to share 2 examples of what might come out into advertisements based on the choices you make as a brand. So this is within the beverage industry. I'm going to show 2 examples.
That's good. Drinkability, my friend. Drinkability means Bud Light won't fill you up. So you got plenty of room for your favorite festival cuisine, you know, like funnel cakes, turkey legs, my personal favorite, baba ganoush.
What's baba ganoush?
No idea, but it sounds cool. Dude, draw your own food.
Never filling, always refreshing. Bud Light. The difference is drinkability.
This weighs a ton.
All right, that's example 1. Now I'm going to show you example number 2.
Dedication. Loyalty.
Guys getting better at this, yeah. Next week, buddy.
Friendship. The choices we make reveal the true nature of our character.
Yeah, so 2 different approaches to how they wanted to spend their resources to communicate with their potential customers. And which of those choices do you think might be more likely to create an advocate of your brand? Someone who's going to be in social media talking about you, sharing your new products with friends. The first one clearly communicated their product benefit, and you understood it at the end, and it's funny, and you can engage with that. And the second one chose to go a different angle of creating an empathic connection with you as a viewer. And I would argue that that might have a stronger return on their investment. So just to recap, empathy is allowing what's coming into your head to impact your heart and create this compulsion to act on their behalf. And relating back to that story is, are you ready to see that need? Are you making yourself available and deciding to see the needs of another? Are you close enough to feel the stopping when somebody really needs you? And can you reach out? Can you act on their behalf? Can you hold their hand? So, thank you.